We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Prosecutions that appear political are the bane of any civilized nation and should be avoided at all costs. But what happens when a prosecutor says they have a lock-solid case? And then what happens when a significant portion of that prosecutor's political party joins the fray? Well, that's what we're going to examine today. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Great Falls, Montana on KQDI 1450 AM and 97.5 FM. We thank you for taking the time to tune in. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. The biggest news of the year, at least so far, is the criminal case against former President Donald Trump. Now, on today's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, we welcome back our superstar triumvirate of senior political analyst Tim Donner, legal affairs editor Scott D. Cosenza, and myself, glorified T-boy and host. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Now, let's thank you.
I'm going to have to cross off the Alec Baldwin prosecution collapse from my most important events of the year to date, Mark. I appreciate you setting.
I'm sorry.
They run also neck and neck for Scott. Those two stories, neck and neck.
Well, hopefully there'll be some Meghan and Harry stories which you can get your mind around this, Scott, to keep those in the public consciousness. Now, Scott, let's start with the legal viewpoint on the Donald Trump arrest and charging. So first, very basics. What are the charges and why are all 34 felony counts the same thing?
Well, basically the counts are that he caused to create false business records regarding his payment or reimbursement of the payment to Stormy Daniels and payoff for Michael Cohen of that process. So he paid Michael Cohen I think it was $130,000 roughly back that Cohen laid out for Stormy Daniels, and then also Cohen's fee for doing so. But he labeled those payments as legal expenses rather than a settlement payment. And as I understand, the creation of those was regularly occurring checks to reimburse Mr. Cohen for this. So each time the check would be entered into, that's why there's 34 counts, and they're all the same, which is that they basically caused to create this false business record in aid of another crime. Now, there's been much speculation.
That's the key thing, isn't it? That what is the other crime? Because this couldn't be a felony without the in aid of another crime, right?
The creation of the false business record itself under these circumstances is a misdemeanor in New York and not a felony. They need the other crime to make it a felony, and the other crime is not listed in the filed indictment. We suspect it is.
By waiting to find it, no doubt, right?
Those of us that are paying attention to the story and who have read the reports of people who have sources inside the DA's office say that it is about basically an election law violation, that Trump didn't correctly report that payment. And so that is the crime that then loops this into a felony.
So let's just
34 felonies, as you pointed out.
So the crime would be an election law filing crime. Now, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, they actually already looked into this, didn't they, and decided that there wasn't enough evidence to charge?
The immediate past holder of the office that Alvin Bragg sits in,
Cyrus Vance Jr.,
looked at this under the precise factual analysis that Mr. Bragg found criminal liability and did not find criminal liability. That was another Democrat progressive DA looking to hoist up Donald Trump for the sake of doing so, because he's enemy number one for that group. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, it has been looked at. And of course, they didn't want to prosecute because it is a loser of a case. It's a loser of a case because for Donald Trump to be successfully prosecuted under it, you basically have to prove that the only reason why he agreed to pay off Stormy Daniels was because of his election prospects. And there's a great deal of evidence that suggests that while that may be true, that he did so to advance his election prospects, but also to simply not have Stormy Daniels out there blabbering about the tryst that they had, especially since
allegedly
Melania would be, and Mr. Young Baron would be negatively impacted, especially by it.
Okay, Tim, you made a point on a former edition of LN Radio that financial filings like this, for example, from John Edwards and Hillary Clinton, they weren't prosecuted in the same way. What do you make of it?
Well, there's two sets of laws apparently in the country, one that applies to every citizen except Donald Trump, and one that applies to Donald Trump. Look, this looks like I say looks like, to a political analyst like me, looks like a spectacular fail. It seems to me, too, that this is an all or nothing. Now, Scott can answer that because it's 34 counts of the same crime, essentially, or alleged crime. So it seems to me they get 34 convictions or they get 0. But I think everybody clearly was expecting a whole lot more than Alvin Bragg delivered on Tuesday. And I think the progressives are soon going to be in meltdown, realizing that the likelihood that this isn't going to result in conviction, even before a Manhattan grand jury in a famously left-wing city, New York's about 92% Democratic on average. It all brings to mind the Peggy Lee song. Is that all there is? Is that it? Because if that's it, it seems to me Scott can speak to the legal angle on this, but from a political angle, I think it could be a major, not just a fail, but a very damaging fail, because if this fails, how are people going to react to all the other cases that they will pound in on him, like in Georgia and like by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith?
Yeah, we will be touching on those later in the show. Scott, could you come back on that point that Tim makes? And so is Tim correct in saying that it's an all or nothing result expected from the jury?
Well, I think what Tim was suggesting is that you wouldn't expect to see, not guilty on counts 1, 7, 14, and 19, and then guilty on all the others.
Right.
It's either he directed this, and I'll just use the term that the prosecutors will use, is a scheme to enter into these false business entries, and they're all included in that, or they're not, practically speaking. I'd like to ask Tim a question about his analysis regarding the political stuff, and I want to know, is he assessing that political damage that he foresees from the perspective of Mr. Alvin Bragg?
Well, remember that 20% at most of the country is progressive. Half the country is Republican, half's Democrat, essentially, if you factor in independents that lean one way or another. But in the view of the average voter looking at this, someone who may be a little bit left, a little bit right, but they don't obsess about politics, if they see that this case, they could see they didn't get the handcuffs, right? They didn't get the perp walk. They didn't get the leg irons and the things that they would have liked to get. I don't know that they're going to get them in December when the case is forwarded to. But from a progressive standpoint, let's put it this way. I think that Bragg has failed everybody. He's failed the country with a clearly political prosecution/persecution. He's failed conservatives by targeting their man for any kind of crime they could find. And he's failed progressives who largely feel that there's real crimes that Trump committed, perhaps in Georgia trying to fix the vote, perhaps in his behavior after the election, perhaps in his holding classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. But progressives have to feel that they have to feel let down by this, because people were sure there'd be some kind of surprise, something that Bragg would bring up in his media availability, so to speak, on Tuesday. but there wasn't. And it has to leave everybody empty. And I don't think anybody is really pleased with this, except the people that hate Trump so much that just the fact he was arrested was enough for them.
Okay, well, I think you got your answer there, Scott. Now, we'll be back with Tim and Scott after this short break, talking Donald Trump's reaction. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.